What's up, cops? I'm Lydia in Nashville, and I have with me Marcus and Andrew. If y'all want to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, hi, what's up, cops? This is Marcus from Ottawa, Canada. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for having me. My name is Andrew. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, currently in San Diego. I'm glad you're having me here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I will say when Marcus sent me the movie or the episode, let's say the episode,
Yeah.
last month to watch, the follow-up question I had, because I was in the airport and I was listening to it, I was like, is this an ABOUNA making this movie? So this film for me was just amazing, and I think it brought up a lot for me too. So I mean, Marcus, what were your first impressions of the
Um,
episode?
yeah, it's interesting because I like to you have assumptions, and also I love when my assumptions are challenged, and I would be totally wrong with my assumptions. And actually, so my assumption was like, yeah, is it like a kind of like another cheaply made Saint movie?
Mm,
Uh,
mm, mm,
or not really, because also for me a video experience, or I like watching movies with better quality, not necessarily for me the plot not as important as much as like I want to see quality picture regardless of the content. And I thought I haven't seen a lot of content in our communities that are made in quality, um, beyond like the weddings and stuff like that. So it was the first assumption was trumped when oh the videography quality is really well, and then the other assumption was like, so maybe the plot would be like not as thick or not as complex or not as real. So that this has been challenged too. So I liked it, Andrew.
Thank
mm,
you. I'm glad. I'm glad you liked it. I mean, it was important to me that I did want to make something that the Coptic community felt like was um, for them in a sense,
mm,
but also, like you're saying, not something cheaply made,
mm.
because we have a lot of things for us that are, not the highest quality, and I understand why, because
Right,
it's
right,
challenging to do something like that. And also, I don't know that it's encouraged in our community too much to
right.
get into the arts and get into creative work, and
Mm,
so yeah.
yeah. So we're speaking about ABOUNA, which is the first episode dropped on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube, and it's very interesting because it follows the backstory and also kind of the first few months of this priest in a church in the United States, and kind of the challenges he faces. I will say I'm glad you brought up, Marcus, some of the assumptions. When I first saw it, and I heard about it, I was like, this is going to be something that's I'm going to be honest, I'll be like it was kind of propaganda. Um and so that's what I entered in with, is the idea that this is going to be like uh, a lot of church propaganda about uh things are not that great, but it's okay. It's okay. Things, the attitude of we don't really want to fix things, but we want to provide excuses for them. So, but I will say this film isn't, or episode is not like that at all. I think that it actually confronts a lot of the realities in a way that we can be sympathetic to all the characters, but also see that they're also trying. It's a very humanistic perspective.
Yeah.
Um, and it covers a lot of the issues that we are all familiar with too. I don't think anything was like, it seemed like too foreign for me in Nashville, that this is something, um, in a different diasporic experience. Yeah. So Marcus, do you want to add anything about the makeup of the movie too, or Andrew?
Yeah, I would add something, and actually I would love to hear
Mm,
Andrew's perspective
mm,
after both of us are doing these reflections, because as a person who grew up doing nothing but the church up until university, I grew up deeply immersed in the Coptic community in Egypt, and then I suddenly got to a point that I found that most of my male friends are now priests, bishops, monks, metropolitan. So, and it's interesting because to a point that I'm super interested in, if somebody who is like in the humanities that would like to study the growing of or the making of a Coptic church leader, especially also I have always been interested in the growing of the Coptic church leader, and Pope Shenouda's era of that making of what we call the modern Copticity in Egypt and now in diaspora. So I am super interested in that, how a Coptic church leader, a priest, or a man in black would be formulated, or what's the format and what's the background. Because I'm a person who would be really criticizing the institution from so many years, and then at the same time, I know many people in the institution, so I treat everybody as two people: a person who represents the institution, but at the same time, those are my friends. So this is where I came to deal with this story and this movie. So I'm in, like, yeah. So love to hear from you, Andrew. Why you choose this story? Why you choose that topic?
Yeah, Marcus, I feel the same way. I mean, I think we all have critiques of the organization and of the structure. And I'm coming from the humanities. I mean, I went to grad school in communication, and I have been taught to think critically about things. And at the same time, there's a verse that we highlight in the film. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So my feeling is that the church doesn't need, like what Lydia, you talked about, like propaganda and marketing. The church doesn't need us to be propaganda for it. It doesn't need marketing. If it's the truth, that's the church needs itself. It doesn't need humans to tell people, like, to kind of prop up the church in a way. So I'm very confident in the ability of the faith itself to keep its strength. I think I think a lot of times, anytime we have some sort of critique of the organization or of the structure, people tend to think, well, it's an attack on the church. And it's not. In the same way that I have my own family unit, my wife and kids, we talk about, hey, we have to communicate better. I don't like when this is happening. I'll give you I don't like when you leave your dishes in the sink when the dishwasher is empty. Right? Put it in the dishwasher. So that's not me saying I don't love my family. That's not me saying this family's not working for me. Sorry, there's something wrong with this family. There's something wrong. No, there's small things here and there that keep us from being at our best. And to me, I think it's good for us to talk about those things. I can tell you all about the genesis of this project, and the spark from my friend bringing up an idea of like looking at the church. Doing it like The Office, the TV show, which I'm sure many of us like. That was the original idea. That was the original spark, and that was more than 6 years ago. But when I think about why I continued with this and why I started interviewing priests in 2018 and their wives, and why I started doing a little bit more ethnographic research on the church, really intentional research, it's because I care about culture, and I care about my culture. And when I say my culture, I mean the cultures that I'm a part of. So and that includes the Coptic Church. And that's not a criticism of the faith at all. I think it's good for us to critique the things around the edges that sometimes are more salient or more apparent than the actual faith. Like, it's the cultural stuff, it's the organizational stuff, and it's good for us to talk about those things.
Yeah. I'm curious why you chose the perspective of the priest to kind of tell this narrative about the Coptic Church, as opposed maybe like servant, or maybe an elder, or maybe even a child. I also, let me just say, I also have like a little script in my head for for an office level church drama too. So that is so funny that you mentioned it. I love how we're all in the same bubble, but
yeah. Well, okay. So I want to mention that thing about The Office first, because I think it's to me, that's very much my style, like mockumentary stuff. Like, that's what I've done in the past with
I thought it was hilarious. Yeah.
Well, I don't take any. Despite what you might see in this film, like, this is the most serious thing I've done. I don't do things seriously. I'm usually making things that are jokes, and I'm sarcastic all the time, and people don't know that I'm being sarcastic. And so The Office is very much my style, but I guess I wanted to challenge myself to do something different than I was used to. But I would love, oh man, I would love to do a mockumentary about the church. Not about the faith, I'm talking about the culture and our relationships and things like that. There's a lot of fun stuff that I think we would all relate to. It's the kind of stuff we do when we go to church retreats, right? When we're kids. I mean, we do this all the time. We're doing a retreat and we're like playing roles and stuff like that. In terms of gosh, I forgot the actual question.
Choosing the perspective of the priest to be the vehicle. Yeah.
So when so my friend George, he suggested, because I was trying to make 52 films in a year in 2018 because I was trying to get better at filmmaking. That's the short version. I wanted to go more into filmmaking, and I was trying to get better. I asked him for an idea. He mentioned The Office, mockumentary idea, and then I thought, it's interesting to think about the priest. I don't want to make a film where the priest is a fool. I don't think that's accurate in most cases, and nor do I think it would be received well by anybody, really. And then I just thought about the role of the priest. I mean, very few people understand the priest's perspective or the priest's wife's perspective or a bishop's perspective. I mean, really, it's hard to understand that. And in some ways, I do feel like, and I'll say this has been confirmed by my conversations afterwards, priests are often caught in the middle of this really crazy tension that we have in our church of, I want things to be the same. I want things to evolve. I mean, they're caught in the middle of this so much. And so there are a lot of priests who they're more accepting of evolution of things in the church than we think, because they don't speak out about it. But to see their perspective on everything, I thought would be really enlightening for a lot of us, including myself. I mean, I'll say I interviewed a dozen priests to start this project. I was blown away by what the perspective that they had that I never would have thought of. So in some ways, I also think, I mean, for those of us who are maybe a little bit more like frustrated with the structure of the church sometimes, I think it's good for us to understand before we critique. And so for me to understand the priest a little bit better was really helpful for me in making this film.
Interesting. And I have a lot of questions in terms of, so you wrote the script too?
Yeah.
Okay. And you're behind the camera as well?
If I'm not on screen, I'm holding the camera. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
If I'm on screen, my wife is holding the camera.
And really? Okay.
Yes. It was very super low budget production. I didn't pay a single person to help with this. My kids are holding the boom mics. Yeah, it's very, very, I mean, the crew, honestly, like there were some shots where the crew was literally just my wife and we had mics placed around the room, and it's just me and Dina filming the scene, and my wife has the camera, and that's it.
Oh, did you have to direct her in any way of how to hold the camera and such? Because okay. Yeah.
No, she learned. I mean, when we started the project, October 2021, I mean, I don't think she'd feel comfortable holding the camera. And then we just did more and more and more. And I mean, it's as simple as saying things like, there's something called focus peaking, for example. When you're in focus, there's a blue line around your face on the screen. And so it's as simple as me saying, Heather, just make sure the blue line stays on my face. I don't care what else you do. Hold the camera however you want, frame me however you want. Just make sure the blue line's on my face. I don't think people realize how low budget this actually was.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, actually, Andrew, there is an interesting focus on family, the relationship between. I don't want to get into like spoilers because we're going to have a showing for the movie online next week, but there is a focus like on family, the relationship between the ABOUNA and Tasuri, and also on women in this movie. Like, what got you into to do that focus? Yeah.
I'm glad you recognize that. So the focus on family, specifically the relationship between the priest and his wife, to me, that's I've always been interested in it because we don't. There's really not an analogy for that outside the Orthodox Church. If you think about Catholic priests, they're unmarried. If you think about Protestant ministers or preachers, it's a different kind of relationship they have with the congregation than we have. I mean, not always, but the way that the Coptic or Orthodox priests have to relate to the congregation, but then also still have a family life, and the clash they have in terms of like the scheduling and attention and things like that, I'm fascinated by it. That came up in the interviews all the time. They talked about the challenge of being a father to the family and a father to the church at the same time. It's really, really hard. And they all, with no exceptions, said, without my wife, there's no way I could do this without the way that she supports me. And to me, that's one step towards a recognition of, let's say, like maybe the imbalance of the gender roles in the church. And for me, it's important also for us to recognize that there are, again, it's a recognition, it's honesty about what the roles, like what the different gender roles are in our church. It's going to be explored more in future episodes. I'll say that. The second episode focuses on Tassoni. It's really, I think, one of those things where, this sounds like I'm asking for, change based on this. I'm not. I want people to have a conversation, but I think the role of women in our church is a really good place for us to start in terms of thinking about how can we evolve a little bit and address some of the aspects of culture that might be lingering from the legacy of, where the Coptic Church started. So, there are a lot of things we do. I'm sorry if I'm going too much into. Please stop me.
No.
We have rites and rituals that are, anywhere from. I mean, I'm going to be extreme here. Like, women cannot be priests. Okay, so that's one end of it, and then the other, and that's kind of like we're talking about something that is a major theological ritual issue, and then we have things on this other side which are like women need to cover their heads in church. Okay, so along that spectrum, there are things that I think most of us would agree, we should probably take a second look at these things. Okay, so not being able to take communion on your period, that's something that should be potentially readdressed. The idea that baptism is different for little boys or little girls because of the cleanliness of the mother. So, like, these are things that I think that need to be thought about in terms of, are they theological, or, as somebody has said, are they theological opinion, or is it cultural? And so I'm maybe going a little bit too deep here, but I think it's something for us to think about, like the role of women in the church maybe needs to be looked at a little more carefully.
Have you, or what has been kind of the interesting conversations that have come up because of this film with community members?
Yeah, the big thing, because of, again, without spoilers, the big thing is that people talk about what does it mean to change culture? What does it mean to, people say, why do you want to remove culture from the church? And to be clear, when people do watch this, the filmmaker, I'm writing characters that are saying something. Because something does not mean that I believe it to be true. I don't think it's good to spread rumors, but a character spreads rumors. This doesn't mean I think it's good. It just means they did it. I don't think it's good to be incompetent at your job. I don't think it's good to be like confused. The priest is a little bit confused. He's starting the job. So I'm writing characters, and then we can have conversations about like what's happening there. The biggest piece of conversation that's come out of this is what is the role of culture in the church? How do people say, how do we separate culture and faith and spirituality? And I think those are all good conversations to have. I think it's more complicated than saying, how do we separate? I don't think you can separate. Maybe the better question is, how do we align the culture to our spirituality? And I'd say the other thing that's come out of this is that people often want to talk about the identity of the church, and how do we view the church when we look at a film like this. What does it say about the church? I will say that I've gotten almost all positive feedback. I mean, I know maybe people are holding on to their negative feedback, so I don't want to assume that there's no negative feedback. But when there are critiques, which are totally fair, the critiques are, well, you made the church look bad, or now that you've exposed these things, why don't you show the good side of the church? I understand that, and I think there's a little bit of a legacy of people feeling like if we talk about the church, we have to talk about it always like you said with the propaganda a little bit. It's like, yeah, there are problems, but everything's fine. And this film doesn't say that. It doesn't say everything's fine. It says what's going to happen, right? What the episode says, like what's going to happen next. So I think that's where some of the criticism lies. It's what do you think about culture, and also then what are you saying about the church? How are you making it look? And my response to the second question is, I'm not making the church look any particular way. This is one project, and if we had like 15 different projects, they would all give us a complete picture of the church. But I think people sometimes maybe want this one to speak for everybody, but it doesn't. It's one film. It's one fictional priest. It's not a real priest. So yeah.
Speaking of the fiction and this like disclaimer at the beginning of the episode,
and the
and
then everywhere. I think
and verbally when I do it in person. Yeah.
So, and it resonates with what was because also I listened to your interview with Mina Msiha.
Yeah.
And it was.
By the way, can I tell you something?
Yeah, tell me.
Your mustache is better than Mina's.
Oh, yeah,
guy, he's coming in and just shaving his beard and acting like this. I mean, it's a good mustache, but
yeah, he invited.
If Mina hears this, he's gonna be upset.
Thank you. I was actually maybe that's an interesting segue, because it was when I saw Mina doing these episodes, and then I told him, oh, you need to get me on your podcast, because I am the mustache. So we had a good conversation. So that's why I came across the special episode that he conversed with you about the episode or the movie. So I felt that there was like a lot of, and that resonate with like the disclaimer. Why do we have like lots of tiptoeing or feeling that like looking over our shoulders? The self-censorship, especially also I have lived in Egypt, and the censorship is everywhere. And when I moved to the US and then Canada, and I have seen how the Coptic community, while we are, and you folks at the interview talked about that sort of double life, like folks are very well established in their career. They are extremely professionals, very talented, and then and on the job they are very outspoken, they are very like practicing, they don't look over their shoulders, then when we get into our communities, we have to tiptoe and we have to like write big disclaimers and stuff like that. So tell me about that process. What are the things that, why did you feel that you needed to put that disclaimer, and why you strike that balance of like, oh, most people give you good feedback, so what are the things also that I wish that I wanted to push a little further in the movie, but this might agitate people? So tell me about all these things.
So first of all, I wanted to make sure that this is a project coming from me, not from the church, and that is to protect both sides. So when I say both sides, I mean myself, and protect the church. Anybody who's involved in the project, I tell them, hey, this is not a church project. It's a project about the church. And it's not because I don't want to be associated with the church. It's because I don't want the church to feel any responsibility for this project. I think there's a little bit of like, if you're going to do a study of something, who funds it, right? If it's a study of the church and the church funds it, then do people feel like it's being honest? There's a little bit of that. And I don't want it to be something where, you know, I'm being told, hey, remove this part, or you shouldn't talk about this. And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying I don't want the church to control me. It's just, I just would rather have that separation. So there's not an obligation by the church to feel like, hey, we have to make sure we take care of this thing, right? We want to make sure that everything's right. Just, you know, I kind of step back and say, I'll take care of it. And I, of course, for the record, talking with priests regularly throughout this project. I mean, this is not something where I'm like doing it on my own and I don't want any connection to the church. It's more that officially I want it to be separate. I think sometimes the reason we have a hard time talking openly about the church, I would point to three things. Number one, above all, is identity. I think that we, in the Coptic Church, it's not just the Coptic Church, by the way, it's many organizations. You can look at things like, sorry if I'm bringing in politics into this, and I shouldn't talk about politics. I don't know what's allowed.
We talk a lot about politics, and we don't have
Okay.
red lines here. So go for it.
All right. So in the United States, you know, sometimes with certain people running for president, there's like a cultish appeal. And for those people, anything that happens, you can't criticize what happens. It's like, no, actually, it's good for this reason. No, it's good to have felony counts for this reason. Like, because it's once you're part of the group, sorry, there's a plane going overhead. I apologize for the noise. Once you are part of the group, you don't want to challenge the identity, right? You don't want to say like, well, maybe this was wrong. You know, maybe this actually isn't perfect and we can change it. So we have really strong ties to the identity of the Coptic Church. And I say we, I mean we as a community, to varying degrees, right? There are people who are, and this is, again, not a criticism, people who they live their entire lives in the church, right? They're at church 4 to 5 times a week. They, in their free time, they spend time with people at church, which I do. They're learning hymns all the time. They get tattoos on their wrists. This is not a criticism. These are I mean, we care about our community. We care about being Coptic. I was very proud as a kid to say I'm Coptic Orthodox. You know, I'm still proud of it. I'm just saying that as a kid, it was like, yes, I'm different. Look at how I'm different. And we talk about like the one true faith and things like that. So that's one part of it. I think because it's our identity, we have a hard time critiquing it. The second thing is, I do think that in the church, organizationally, we're not a huge fan of kind of like what in business they might call 360 feedback, right? I don't want feedback from my superior. I don't want feedback from the people who I'm in charge of. I don't want feedback from the people like, we're not really great at feedback in our church. And that's not a criticism of our church. That I think all churches are like that. I don't think it's like, you know, we might be a little bit more conservative in that way, but I think in religion, it's harder to kind of have that mentality of like getting lots of feedback. I just don't think it happens a lot. The third thing is that I don't think we recognize the complexity of our experience in the Coptic Church very much. So again, we have these layers of things like spirituality and culture and identity and organizational structure. And sometimes we just blend all these things together. And we assume that if somebody says something like, hey, I was just wondering why men and women have to sit separately. If we hear that, we go, are you saying the church is wrong? No, we're not saying that. We're talking about a guideline. And so I think people have a hard time separating those things because it's complex, right? All these things are tied together. And this is where I think education is really important. I think it's good for us to have an understanding, to be able to pull apart these different aspects. We talk a lot about culture. I don't even think people know what culture is in a lot of cases. I'm not saying you don't. I think you all do. But I think a lot of times when we talk about culture, people aren't really clear on like, what is culture? They think they know it, but we don't really have like a definition for it. So I think it's good for us to be a little bit more educated so we understand the complexity a bit more.
One of the scenes that I really appreciated, building on the identity and culture conversation, was the scene where Beeman's little family, we go back in time to the ABOUNA being a child, and his family is being visited by other Egyptians. And there's a really good conversation about race and racialization. And I think this is, I don't know if it's the first time a Coptic made film has ever spoken about race in the context of the United States. So, and it's a very good conversation in Arabic too, which I think is even, it adds another level of complexity that it's done in Arabic, about how cops are otherized. Can you speak to how you like thought about that scene, or what kind of moved you, what was inspiration for it, how you wrote this, like the scenario, like the scene out? I was just very fascinated by, and I loved how the older sister too is very talkative and present as well, and kind of speaking with the the three older folks. So it was just a really good scene, and I was wondering what the thought process there was.
Yeah, I never get asked about this, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, all the Q&As, all the interview, I never get asked about this scene at all.
I love the older sister, so.
Oh yeah, she's great. So part of it is I'm trying to set up things that happen in future episodes. So conversations about the experience of being, that first generation. Like my parents were. My parents moved to North America in the 70s, and I saw reflections of how my parents, what their life was like in the 80s and 90s. I think that they would say it was pretty smooth sailing, as for the most part. And my parents are very, they're very good at acculturating. I mean, my dad's on time for everything, for example. They never really felt like, no, we have to, we can't be American. Like, they didn't like baseball, but other than that, they could be Americanized when they needed to be. But I saw it in my friends' parents, and I saw that there's kind of like this pride and of challenge of like, who am I? And I think it's good for us to recognize that it's not just, let's say, our generation, right? It's not just those of us who are born in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. No, actually, our parents face the same thing too. They faced challenges, sometimes flipped around, right? Sometimes it was, to them, it was like, I want to prove that I am, like Christian, for example. I want to let people know, like, yeah, look at my skin color, but no, I'm actually one of you. I'm actually an American, not an American, but like, I'm actually like you Americans, in that I, and then the other layer of it being, that they're going to have to deal with this, their kids later, who are sometimes going to say things to them like, you're not American enough to me, right? We don't say it in those words, but I made fun of my parents' accents all the time. Now looking back, I'm like, oh man, I feel so bad about that. I did it because I was, it's, I was 15 years old. That's kind of like what I knew it was funny to us. And so I'm setting up something here that, there's an episode about the dad at work, some of the challenges he faces. I was also inspired by my daughter. My daughter's 15, but when I started writing this, 9, 10, she acts like an adult. I mean, she's very much an adult, and she'll be involved in our conversations, and she'll ask tough questions. Like, you're doing this, but what about this? And I'm like, well, that's really thoughtful. And, there's a small line that's kind of a throwaway line, but it's supposed to be meaningful. She's talking to the other little girl and says, like, you can speak up. Like, you don't have to be so quiet. Showing, like, sometimes you need, like, the older woman to tell you, like, it's okay. Like, you don't have to be what they're telling you to be, and be quiet. And so that character, Christina, the older sister, she also has an episode in the future, and it's about her trying to be more vocal about things and receiving pushback. And so I was trying to set up some of those storylines that are coming.
I love the older sister, so I'm looking forward to that one. I love the dynamic too, that like the boys are watching their, I guess, baseball. I don't know their sports, and so she's kind of stuck in between. I don't want to be with the kids watching baseball, but like also I'm gonna be here and engage, and so.
Did you have that experience, Lydia, when you were?
Yes, it resonated with me as just. I felt like all the scenes with the family were just well written. And I felt like this was a very believable family dynamic, but like unique, but enough of familiarity to it as well. Not seeing a mom, but feeling like there's this dad trying to do his best, and he doesn't want to be too strict, which I feel like is very
and I didn't want the stereotypical 90s Egyptian dad who's
Yeah.
like yelling, because my parents are lovely, and my parents were they were strict and at the same time very like open and flexible about things. And I didn't want to write this kind of like hardline dad who's like saying like, that's it, you can go out. Like, I don't really want that, because I felt like I don't know. There's I mean, there's a little bit of like pulling back the curtain on on screenwriting. You the relationship with the parent is really important in a lot of stories. And because you don't see a father of confession in this, because when I started making this, I didn't know if I can get another priest to be in this. How would I get a priest to be in this? I didn't know the answer to that question.
Right.
I was able to find a 60 to 80-year-old man with a beard who would be willing to do this. And so because of that, I wanted to make sure that he had a good relationship with his father, whoever his father was, that it wasn't this like, kind of like standoffish relationship.
And all of these people are not actors too?
There's not a single person in this who's an actor. Bassem Shenouda, who plays the father, he, since this, has started acting classes, and he actually brought his acting class to a screening. But man, they did an amazing job.
Yeah, the little kid is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I was so impressed with them.
Yeah.
For anybody who's trying to write stuff, if you're trying to write a film, I'll tell you a technique that I used that I think helped a little bit, which was I just made sure people were playing characters who were similar to themselves in some way. The people in their 20s are all playing like versions of themselves in a way. I mean, 2 or 3. Roxanne's not a rumor spreader. That's not. But she's very much like like she knows a lot about the church. She loves the church, and also, she's got a lot to say. And I love Roxanne. She's great. My mom and my dad are in this as well. My mom is playing the woman who asked for more Arabic. My mom's like the opposite, by the way. She's always like, we need more English. We need more English. My dad plays the character who says, he's the one who's like, I sit down with him and he's talking about how like you're changing too many things. It's a version of my dad. I mean, it's not like that far off from what my dad is. I mean, he's not like that exactly, but yeah. So people are just playing a version of themselves to a degree.
The older gentleman in the courtyard of the church who pulls you aside.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
About ABOUNA Mor'os was doing this, and
yeah.
Okay.
And that's the last scene that we filmed. So I showed this a year ago tomorrow. Sorry if I'm dating when we're actually a year ago in June 2022. I showed it a couple times, and then in September I was like, I have to replace a couple of these scenes where the audio is just, the audio needs to be like good enough, and in a couple of scenes the audio is not good. So I actually replaced one of the scenes completely. I rewrote it, and we filmed it in September. And that was the last scene with my dad in the courtyard, being a little bit more direct about like you're changing too much, because I felt like it wasn't entirely clear. So yeah, that was my dad, and he was very willing to do it. I mean, it actually surprises me. My mom being willing does not surprise me. My mom's always game for these things. Being willing to do it was surprising to me.
It was great casting, especially the Tunt who was like very big on the gossiping.
Oh yeah,
he was like, no, when Roxanne was talking.
Mary Musa, she is amazing. And she cuts my kid's hair, by the way, too.
Very talented people.
She's lovely.
Yeah. I have two thoughts, and I don't know. I keep thinking like, which one should I prioritize? But maybe we'll come to both of them. One of them, or maybe you would. I would let you pick, Andrew. Which one would you start with? I am always interested about the processes and the politics inside the church, the administrative politics. So my question was like, how were you able to negotiate? Be like using a real Coptic church's space to shoot at, because I have been in conversations or known of conversations that of different movies that were made about the Coptic church, and the church wouldn't let them, for example, or they would let them to shoot at the church, but with very strict rules. But this is not what I have seen in like. It was like almost freedom of like to shoot whatever, and even like liturgy parts and like So how were you able to negotiate that? My second question, I want to talk about this unchurched copt that was introduced newly, or a new to the which introduced new ideas, challenged
Mm.
I don't know, the challenged the mainstream ideas of the congregants, for example. And those are the people that we see connecting with online through this podcast, through progressive
Yeah.
cops, or Mahabba. So I'm interested about this character. So
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah. So in terms of the process, I asked my priests. I said, I'm working on this project. I'd like to film. They were just very much, yeah, yeah, do it. And I said, this is not a church project. It's my project. They said, yeah, go for it. I'll be totally honest with you all, but maybe not disclose a couple things unless we feel like it's important. They were fully supportive. When the film came out, there was a bit of a challenge from our diocese, from the head of our diocese, and that's when I had, it was harder. I hadn't filmed anything at that, like I haven't filmed anything since that challenge, so I didn't know now going forward for episodes 2, 3, 4 if I'll be able to film in the church. But then I will say, I showed the project in Staten Island, and Emba David was there, and he's the first bishop to say, we're fully in support. You have our full support. And that seems to have smoothed things over in my church. So I haven't asked again about filming. But I will say that I've written things in such a way that a lot of it doesn't need to take place in the church, right? It's not necessarily about what's happening in the church. It's about what's happening with the people. And so I'll see how that is going forward. But even like I filmed one scene in another church, a church in Hayward. The priests there are very supportive. I mean, that I don't know. I found that priests are very supportive of this. Actually, I mean, again, maybe it's selection bias. Maybe they're not talking to me about it. But I found that priests are saying, yes, do this, please. A couple of challenges on the diocese level, but again, Emba David is really supportive. So I think that helps to kind of let people know that, yeah, like this is not it's not me against the church or anything like that. In terms of the unchurched person, you're talking about Rachel. Is that what you're talking about?
The one that was just moved to the community, and this
yeah,
she talks more openly about dating and talking like and going for dancing or something like so.
So that character's name is Rachel. Her real name, by the way, is Raquel. So not so again, trying to keep people close to who they are. Raquel is my niece, actually, and she's not Egyptian. She's Coptic, but she's she wouldn't mind me sharing a little bit about her. Her dad's name is Ulysses. Raquel is Mexican, and Ulysses married my cousin Maria. So Ulysses had a daughter, Raquel. They were married. They got married, and she's very much a part of the church. She's awesome. She's actually going to medical school now over on the East Coast, and so good for her. That character who comes in, who's maybe a little bit more like willing to speak her mind. I mean, it's supposed to be somebody who represents that kind of person, right? Somebody who is able to come in and not like super embedded in the community, but somebody who's kind of looking at it from the outside and saying like, well, here's how I feel about it, and here's me speaking openly about my thoughts. That character, I wish I wrote her a little bit more. I wish I made her a little bit more nuanced, but in any case, I think represents a lot of people who are like on the fringes of the church, who are like, yeah, I'm Coptic, I'm Orthodox. Some things are, whatever. I'm not like gonna like jump in with both feet on all community aspects, but I'm still very much a part of the church. I think it's good to represent those kinds of people. I think we talk about the stories of the saints. Where are our role models? So we listen to the Synaxarium, and we often joke around about, if you're a man, you can be a martyr, and if you're a woman, you can be a virgin, right? Those are your two options if you listen to the Synaxarium. And that can be frustrating when you're a parent and you're trying to raise kids to say, like, who are you as my child, and who can you look to? Who are your role models to say, this is who I could be in the church, right? and again, I'm thinking about somebody like my daughter who is very much a part of the church, but needs role models who act like her and think like her, but are still, again, very much part of the church and have strong faith. So that's a little bit where I was coming from. I wanted to have somebody who represented that kind of person.
Because honestly, this is what we see. The folks who don't really find themselves really fitting in the church, we connect online. And some people actually call themselves in-betweeners. We're like, oh yeah, I go to church, but also I don't really fit into many of the things. So that the church does, but also I can't really unroot myself totally from the community. But every time I go, it's like people spread rumors about me, or this.
And there are certain characteristics or words. I mean, I know for me, I kind of hide like 1% of my personality when I'm at church, because if I were to say something like, I'm going to use a word that scares off people, but is like I think the three of us recognize the normal word. If I say I'm a feminist, then people at church will say, okay, that's interesting.
Just like that.
Right. Yeah. Oh no, let me tell you what Jordan Peterson says about feminism. Like that's what they'll come back with. And so for me, I just don't say certain things just because I know it sets people off. And I think we have to recognize that like that's a very common experience in our church. People will say one thing, or they'll, and it's not against, they're not saying anything anti-orthodox. They're not saying anything against our faith at all, but it's a cultural thing or it's a fringe thing. And then it's like, oh, well, yeah, you shouldn't be, like, we're not gonna put you in charge of something. So happens all the time.
I'm curious about the challenge that you mentioned. You can say you don't want to answer this.
Oh, I'll answer it. Oh, whatever it is.
Okay. I'm curious if it was more about the church actually not being involved in this project as much as it wanted to be, or if it was about anything in the content of the art.
Oh, sorry. When you're referring to challenge, sorry, tell me more.
So was it more of a sense, did you get that they had seen it and they were like, no, this is, we don't like this? Or was it more of like, we did not participate in the making of this, so we do not want to endorse this, or we want to, we just don't want to endorse something we did not participate in making?
Well, it was, I mean, okay, I'll say that I was mostly told the first, but I think sometimes it was actually the second. So
I'm just surprised if it would be the second. So, because I feel like
here's what I've been told, and this is again informally by priests, that sometimes in certain dioceses, if they don't do it, then it's like, it's not our thing, we're not going to support it. And it's not like they're against it. They're not going to bring it into the fold and say this is something that we promote. That's what I've been told by some people who have had, who have done things like that. There's somebody who's worked, and I'll be somewhat anonymous here. He's worked on a very large project that is very much about Coptic culture, super important. A lot of us are familiar with it, but because it wasn't done under the auspices of the diocese, it was kind of like, no, this isn't really going to, we're not going to promote this. We're not going to bring this into our churches and things like that. And so that person gave me advice to say, don't be surprised that this is happening. So it actually is very comforting to hear that hey, it's not personal, right? It's not about me. It's more just this is what happens. I do think that in certain places the film was viewed and it was a little bit like, well, this could challenge the identity of our church a little bit. And I think that's not, and again, I'm not trying to say like I'm doing something that's like powerful. That's not what I mean. I mean more that it's not the standard Coptic film. I think that's hard for some people to say, you know what, I'm okay with this as being something we would say is all right to watch. Again, the flip side of that is priests inviting, sending out invitations to me to say, come and show the film in the church. I mean, it's not like the church is like roundly saying, no, this is not good. I mean, there are a lot of people who've supported it and there are some people who didn't, and they're not, you don't have to support it. It's not.
I'm just curious for other artists who want to create something, and how they should maybe think about the creation of it and
Yeah.
the
I
post.
will say, yeah, I talked about it as a very black and white experience. There were times where I felt like, oh my gosh, these priests are saying, come on out and show us film. We need to show. And I like felt so good because I felt like I'm able to contribute to the church and to the community. And I felt really good about that. And then I'd get an email the next day from a different area saying, here's why you can't do it. And it's a very black and white experience, very much like sometimes I felt like a full member of the church who's really helping out. And sometimes I felt like I was in the blacklist. And I think, what I would say to anybody who's also dealing with something similar is just recognize that that's going to happen. You're not going to get 100% support, and it's better to focus on the support rather than the lack of support. I mean, it's same thing with like YouTube comments, right? Somebody's critical and says something that's like, yeah, be critical. That's fine. There are a couple people who, they'll critique. And then I remember that there are some people who just like to critique things.
Right.
Just like you can argue this film is a critique in some way. You could argue that as well.
Right.
So,
right.
I was honestly so surprised. That's why I asked you that question. I was so surprised that you had that freedom of like that to shoot it inside the church, and even to have poster like screenings inside the churches as well, because that's also another. It's not just the church that you go to or the churches that are in your area. The churches was open to have the screening inside the church, because we if a person have been in these like church kitchen, as they say, I grew up in a church kitchen. My parents have been leaders in the church. So you would find that formally stuff are said in a certain way, but in the background they might be supportive of what you are doing, but they can't really formally or officially tell you, oh, we're gonna have you publicly, we're gonna take a photo with you public or something to that effect. So
well, it's and this is the thing that I learned the most from doing screenings, like from the travel that I did, is that the Coptic Church is not a monolith. We think of it like the Coptic Church is like this. It's not. They're all different. And so ABOUNA Gregory Seraphim inviting me out to Manhattan, or ABOUNA Elijah inviting me out to DC, or ABOUNA Raphael inviting me to Detroit. They're not like every other priest, and their church is not like every other church. And on top of that, even the places where I was not allowed to show in churches, including, by the way, all of California, right? So California split into two different dioceses. Both sections I did not get approval. And that doesn't mean the priests aren't supportive. It just means at a diocese level, they made the decision to not support it formally. I can be frustrated about it that I can't show my own home church, but we'll move on from that. Recognize that like every church is different, and it to be like, I'll give you a great example. Actually, showed it in Manhattan in October. ABOUNA Mina Aziz came from Staten Island, and ABOUNA Mina is he's not a young priest, right? He has a son who's Philip. I don't know how old he is, 25, 30. He's older, and so we would think like, he's not going to like this. No, he loved it enough to invite me back to Staten Island, where we showed it in April. And Staten Island is not a progressive church, right? This is not like a group of converts. Like these are Egyptians, right? They have an Egyptian mini mart in the church, and Staten Island is essentially New Jersey, right? With respect, I mean, they're so close. Yet in New Jersey, they have a very more conservative bishop, and the priest from New Jersey said, "Yeah, we're not going to bother asking you to come out because we know it won't be approved." Whereas in Staten Island, right there, I'm being invited by a priest who's older and super supportive. And so, great example of like every church is different, every priest is different. To people who are thinking like, the Coptic Church is just like that. No, it's not. If you find somebody different, or you find a different community, you will find different viewpoints and perspectives for sure.
I know we're almost running out of time, but I have a question, Lydia. Don't you think that there is a character that might be missing, or why don't you put that character a convert to Orthodoxy in the Coptic Church?
Yeah.
Were you thinking about having a convert character or not, or what? Like,
yeah. I'll say that in episode 2, there's a soft introduction of a convert, meaning they talk about somebody who is thinking about converting, so that that character's not in that episode. My wife's a convert, and when we had discussions about who would play the priests, because my friend was supposed to play the priest, but then he decided not to, and then during COVID for like a year, my wife and I were talking about it. I ended up playing the priest, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I'm talking with my wife, and I'm like, so who's going to, my wife's, the joke in my house was like, my wife is saying, we got to find you a wife. And, it couldn't be my wife, because the way the character was written was that it had to be somebody who grew up in the church. It had to be. And so I wanted to start out with, this is what the church is like. And we are converts in lots of churches, again, including my wife. But I wanted to start out with non-converts, because the introduction of a convert to me needed to be an important part of the story. That here comes somebody from outside the church, joining the church, and then how is that person treated and reflected? And I can tell you, like, my wife, who's blonde, she would often joke around that, like, if she just sticks out like a sore thumb, and if she had a different hair color, if she looked more Egyptian, like, it'd probably be easier for her. By the way, everything's totally fine. Like, everybody gets along really well with her. But I wanted it to be something that was brought in, that we see it happen on screen rather than it already had happened, if that makes sense.
I have one final question, and then maybe we'll wrap. But we spoke a lot about, like, the Coptic engagement with this episode. Has there been any commentary or engagement from non-Coptic people who are curious about this film?
Yeah. Obviously, most of the engagement's been from the Coptic community. It makes sense. I've been very happy to get engagement from people outside of the community. Online, a lot of people who are Orthodox but not Coptic have connected and said, hey, I'm a Syrian. This is exactly like my church. Hey, my dad's a Greek priest, Greek Orthodox priest. Yeah, I would totally relate to this. So from other Orthodox people, there's been connection. I always think about my friend Laura, who came to one of the showings. Her dad is a Presbyterian minister. And she said, this was my dad's life. Like, you captured my dad's life on film. My dad and my mom and dad, right? Like, you captured what it was like, where there's always this tension between the two families, the family at home and then the family at the church. I haven't really gotten a lot of people asking questions about what the Coptic church is like. I was expecting that. I was expecting people to say, like, hey, so you did this thing about the Coptic church. Tell me more about this aspect of it. That hasn't really happened. I feel like it's almost like people understand the Coptic church, which surprises me, because I made a documentary 16 years ago about the Coptic church. I don't like watching it now. It feels very old and very out of date. But when I showed that one in different places, like I showed it when I was living in Texas, and there were a lot of non-Coptic people there, and they had lots of questions about what the church is like. I think things have changed. I think people are able to look up information online. Maybe there's just more understanding of different cultures now. But I haven't gotten any, like, harsh feedback from outside the church saying, "Oh, your community looks really difficult," or anything like that. In fact, I've gotten the opposite. Some of my students came, and they said, "Wow, your community seems really warm, not just here in the room, like we sent you in the room, but also like the way the priest has a good relationship with all the people in the church, and the way that clearly people care about the church, and the way that a woman apologized to somebody else. Like, these are all things like they looked at as very positive." So that surprised me a little bit.
Yeah. What is maybe the final parting words for folks about what you want them to take away from this, or come in to view this episode?
Yeah.
The energy. Yeah.
I think it's a good starting place for conversations. I think there are conversations that we're already having. Somebody one time asked, "Hey, now that you've exposed the issues in the Coptic church, why don't you talk about the good side?" That's what he said, and I said, "Well, hold on, I didn't expose anything." Right? This is the conversations we're always having. We're talking about language. We're talking about culture, And so for some people, it's a continuation of the conversation. We're going to keep having the conversation afterwards. For other people who don't have that conversation regularly, I think this might be a good jumping off point to say, like, yeah, let's talk about that. I think our faith is wonderful, and I think the Coptic Church has so much to offer. And I think sometimes some cultural elements maybe keep that from happening for certain people. I think we have to recognize a lot of the trade-offs in our church. So if we want our priests to be have all this responsibility, it's going to weigh on them. If we want the church to be really Egyptian, right? And I like some of those things. I like when I walk into church and you smell the food and you hear people speaking Arabic, even though I don't speak Arabic. I like those things, but that's a trade-off. If we're going to do that, who does it then make it more challenging to join our church? And so I think it's just good for us to think about the complexity of culture, spirituality, community. If we just keep thinking about those things, I think that that's if the intentions are right, I think we're going to head in the right direction. I also add just one more thing. It's good for us to be creative. It's good for us in the church. We're not always encouraged to do it. It's good for us to create art about the church or inspired by the church. My daughter is into music. She made a thing based on folk tetigum. Like, she made something else. It doesn't have to be that it's all necessarily this is going to be used in the church, but rather things inspired by the church. It's good for us to recognize that the church is a place of inspiration. Our faith is a place of inspiration. And to be creative is, God wants us to be creative. I'm not going to speak for God, but say that, God is a creator himself. And so for us to mimic that and to create ourselves, I think is a positive thing.
Thank you so much. That is such a good note to land on. So we really appreciate your time and coming on the podcast and speaking very extensively about this film. We'll have a showing very soon. Is it June 20th?
June 20th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. So and join us, Andrew, if we are available.
Great, I will.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Oh, we'll see y'all on the next episode. Thank you so much to our guest, Andrew.
Thank you.